Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of 1 Samuel. Today we're in 1 Samuel chapter 25. And as we read the chapter previously, it's a rather lengthy account of a situation that occurs between David and a man named Nabal up in Carmel of Israel. Nabal is a man who is known as being harsh and evil, as it is described early on in chapter 25. And yet he is also one who is a descendant of Caleb, who was the very prominent figure who helped the children of Israel come into the land of Canaan, and was one of the few faithful ones who stood with God in those days. Yet this descendant of his is not going to be like that. So what are some things that we can learn from 1 Samuel chapter 25? Well, let's look at three things today. The first one is David's request that he makes to Nabal. When David comes to Nabal, he comes to him as someone who is seeking assistance, as someone who's looking for help. He doesn't necessarily come making demands, though it can be read that way if that's the way you're inclined. But instead, he talks about the fact that Nabal and his men have been around David and his men for quite some time. David's men have never tried to harm him. They've never tried to steal anything from them. They have watched over them. They've been taken care of when they've been in their presence, and so on and so forth. They are at the time of shearing their sheep, which means there's going to be a lot of product of wool and things of that nature that are going to be available at this time. And what David asks is that some of that be given to his servants, and some of that be given to his men. And Nabal responds with animosity. He responds in verse number 10 by saying, "Who is David and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give them to men whom I do not know where they are from?" Nabal is going to act underhandedly in all of this. Nabal is going to say he doesn't know who David is, he doesn't know where his men are from, he doesn't know anything about them, and therefore, he just accuses David of being somebody who's trying to usurp the king, when actually the exact opposite is true. David is going to take offense at this, and rightfully so. It was meant to be offensive. This wasn't a benign statement or a curious inquiry of what was going on. Rather, this was Nabal saying, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to give you anything. I am in no way going to be of assistance to you. Get out. David becomes angry because his request was a polite one. His request was a sincere one. And yet he has been sorely offended by the response of Nabal. Don't mistake the statement of the early parts of chapter 25 as though this is somehow a shakedown by David or things of that nature, because that's not the intention behind it at all. But the offense that was brought about by Nabal is something that is extreme, and it's over the top. David is going to be angry enough that he is going to respond in such a way that he's ready to go kill Nabal and all of his servants. Now, recognize that at this time, David is in his mid-20s or so. David is still at a point where he is a young man and very much emotionally driven in many different ways. And so you could understand how this particular situation would maybe cause him to react in a more of a brash manner than we would normally expect under such circumstances. And yet there's going to be help in the situation. And that help is going to come from Nabal's wife, Abigail. Abigail, when she hears what's going on, is going to very quickly take loaves of bread. She's going to take things that are at the disposal of the house. This is a very wealthy family at this time. And she is going to go out and she is going to meet David. And she is going to ask David not to follow through with what his intent is. And she is going to use quite a few words here in chapter 25 to try to show David why that is not the right response, that he is the servant of the Lord, that the Lord has been working through him, and that the Lord will continue to help him, the Lord will continue to take care of him if he does the right thing. She asks that there be no grief or no offense, and if there is, to put it on her. Now, Abigail is not saying that her husband is a good man. He's not, and she never states that he is. Instead of pleading to who Nabal is, she instead pleads to who David is, and what David is supposed to be, and David's relationship with the Lord. And David is going to relent. Sometimes we have to be those who remember who we are in times of conflict, because we get so caught up in remembering or thinking about who the other person is that it's easy for us to forget who we are. Abigail comes out to remind David of who he is, not in an arrogant way, not in a haughty way, in a very humble and kind way, to remind David of his relationship with God. David is going to relent in this particular area, and he learns and he sees an important lesson at the end of the chapter, because God is going to take care of Nabal. In verses 37 and 38, we read that the Lord will strike down Nabal for his actions and for the things that he has done. The Lord brings about the judgment. Many times we try to take the judgment into our own hands. We try to be the ones who are going to get the righteousness, the righteous response for the wrongs that have been committed toward us. And yet here in 1 Samuel 25, we see the lesson of letting God be the judge, letting God do what it is that he has the authority to do. There are many passages in the New Testament that talk about not doing evil for evil and to let the Lord be the one who avenges, not us. It is a true principle, and one that is so easy to forget, yet so important to remember, that when we are wronged, we have to remember who we are, and we have to remember who God is, and let him be the judge. These are some of the things that I found in 1 Samuel chapter 25. I hope they're beneficial to you. Next time, we'll come back and we'll begin reading through and looking at 1 Samuel chapter 26. Until then, have a great day.